Yes, we are, Tuesday night trying to figure out whether or not there's actually going to be a football game this week. We feel pretty good about it. We feel like there could be, if not most likely be, a football game coming up on Sunday. Now, this game, of course, has been moved since the last time we spoke with you to Sunday, Broncos versus the Patriots, but we're not going to get into that game just yet. We figured we'd focus on something else. And, Greg, it seems like
Plus, we've already done the game.
That's true. That's true. Maybe we had some different thoughts, maybe some late-breaking things. Everything's running into each other. But we figured as we're approaching the trade deadline, there's going to be no bye week now. We just went through the bye week, so the Patriots don't have that bye week we expected. So we might as well just sit back, kind of kick our feet up, and talk about what this team could be looking for, who's possibly out there, who we like for them to go after. So let's get it started. I mean, you've got your list from BostonSportsJournal.com. The trade deadline, of course, coming up in about 3 weeks. You say the Patriots need to make a deal right now. And let's start with tight end, of course, Devin Asiasi. I think has, 1/3 of the snaps that Rob Gronkowski had in his rookie season at this point. Dalton Keene has been MIA. You've got Izzo, who seems like Izzo seems like a pretty good third option, possible second option, depending on how good your first is. So tell me about tight end.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, I don't know about you, but to me, tight end is clearly the need that needs to be addressed on this team. I think that, you could make the argument for linebacker, and we'll probably get into that, where my dream scenario is getting Deion Jones from the Falcons and somehow maybe a Tooney trade or something like that. So I wouldn't argue with linebacker. I think they could use another body, somebody athletic, who could be a little bit more disruptive, make a few more plays than Juwan Bentley. Receiver, you could certainly make an argument there. I just worry about sort of the trickle-down effect. I mean, if you bring in somebody, let's say a Golden Tate, or I don't think A.J. Green, I don't think the Bengals don't make any moves. Let's say Julio Jones. Say the Falcons start unloading people. Like, what do you do with N'Keal Harry now? Now, does he go to the number 3 or number 4 receiver all of a sudden? Do the Patriots want to do that? I don't know. And you could also make the case for defensive tackle, especially considering Byron Cowart just went on the COVID-19 list and basically leaves Lawrence Guy all by himself in the defensive tackle room for the Patriots. So, but for me, it's at least I think the Patriots at other spots could make it work, and they have so far as playing more safeties at linebacker. Receiver, I think there's still room to grow for that group the more they play, especially with Cam Newton coming back. And defensive tackle, they always sign some guy and plug him in and he does fine. But tight end, they're just getting nothing, Nick. I mean, 7 targets through 4 games is it's pathetic. And it's, if you thought last year was bad, and last year as part of my column on BSJ, I went through basically like the last 10 years at quarterback and how much the tight end position has been a part of the passing offense. Last year dropped to a low of 10%. This year's half that. So last year wasn't good enough. This year certainly isn't good enough. And so I think that they need to do something. And I think, I'm calling the Browns about Njoku, because I think you have the best chance to get a decent price for him because they have a couple of tight end options. I think Ingram for the Giants would be a little bit a higher price because Gettleman's probably not ready to sell the farm. And plus, in the NFC East, who knows what the heck's going to win that division. And they're still in it, even if they're winless. I think Gerald Everett, in terms of, athletic guys, they have Higbee, so maybe they're willing to move on for a guy in the final year of his deal. Zach Ertz in Philly, I've mentioned him in the past. I don't know. The more I read about him writing this story, the more he wants to get paid. That's the whole reason why he's having an argument with the Eagles. Is that
he's got a contract thing? Yep.
Yeah, he does. He's on the books. I think he has 2 more years left on his deal. He certainly has next year, and he's making 8.5, and he's not happy with that. So he wants a new deal. The Patriots aren't going to give him that kind of money, especially he's 30 now and on the downside of his career. So, and I think, a lower priced option to give them another, probably a better receiving threat would be old friend Jacob Hollister from the Seahawks, who last year when he got more time, when Will Dissly was hurt, he did a nice job. He had, somewhere in around 45 catches last year. But now that they went out and got, who's the guy from Carolina? Greg Olsen. They got Greg Olsen to give a little bit more of a veteran receiving threat, and Dissly's back. Now Hollister suddenly doesn't have a role and he doesn't have anything to do. He would certainly upgrade the Patriots in terms of an athletic guy who can catch the ball right now and knows the offense, and would probably be very cheap for them to get. So, that's sort of where I am on tight end. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about Njoku because of his health. I'm concerned about a number of guys because of their health as well. So when I look at the list that you put together, the guy that jumps out to me is Gerald Everett. I feel like I know what Hollister is. Again, you've got some health questions. I'm concerned about Zach Ertz's contract situation, and I've watched the Eagles a number of times this year. He doesn't look as spry. Now, maybe that's because they're not using him the same way, but he doesn't look like the same guy. They might be going away from him, but Dallas Goedert's been banged up. So to me, it feels like they need a tight end within that offense. So why is he not getting as much love? That's an interesting question that I haven't been able to answer just yet. So I look at Everett, I say he's athletic. He can catch the football. He's battling with a lot of guys out there in LA. We know McVay loves to throw the football, but he's got Cooper Kupp, he's got Reynolds, he's got other guys. You mentioned Higbee. So I think he's one of those guys that could possibly be a number one tight end in the right role with the right situation, and he's just healthier, and he has no contract stuff hanging over his head either. So the guy I look at is Everett. Now, as far as linebacker, you mentioned Deion Jones. I don't think.
Hang on, before we go to linebacker, let's just expand a little bit on. I agree with you on Njoku. Like he seems to be always hurt, but he's talented. He's a kid who I think he ran a fast time out of the combine. I think they picked up his fifth year option, so that's there. I think it's around like 6 or 7 for next year. So at least you're getting a second year out of him. And now that he's back from injury, maybe you're getting him. Maybe he's had his injury issue for the year and he's going to be fine.
Hopefully, fingers crossed. The same could be said for Evan Ingram. That's another guy you brought up.
Exactly. Another guy who's been beat up a lot. Talk about a tremendous upside in terms of his speed and athletic ability, and have they gotten the best out of him with Daniel Jones and all the changes there? Could he benefit by a chain of scenery? Yes, I think so. But I think Everett is interesting. He's a guy who I've had my eye on for a couple years, and because he looks like, when you watch him play or you see him on the field, you're like, oh, that guy looks like a prototypical athletic tight end that can make plays in the passing game. But it hasn't been put together, and that it hasn't come together with him with McVay, which I wouldn't say is an overly complex system. It leads me to believe there are a bunch of red flags in terms of, football IQ, buy-in, toughness, whatever it is, it's not working with him. And if it's not working with him with McVay, who comes from the Kyle Shanahan tree, and we all know how much they love tight ends, and that he got passed by Tyler Higbee, who is a good tight end, but nothing great. I just have a lot of questions about that. And so, yeah, I mean, in terms of athletic ability, if you're looking for upside and something that you might not get from Izzo, Asiasi at some point, and Keene, then those are definitely the three guys that if you're the Patriots, you're going to Nick Caserio and the pro personnel department saying, like, all right, what's the deal with these guys? Let's watch some film, and then sort of ranking them and taking the best guy. I think if it were me, I think in terms of I would ask about Ingram first, but I don't think it's going to be a good answer. Then Njoku, and then Everett, and then we can get into sort of backup options if the price isn't reasonable.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the guy can make the club because he's not in the tub, right? I mean, if you got somebody like Njoku and Ingram who has the long lineage, long history of having injury issues, I don't know if I want to mess around with that and give up an asset for it, but. Listen, sometimes you take the swing, and depending on how much you're asking for, if you're telling me that you can get Njoku for like a 4th-round pick or something, then I would take the swing and the risk with the health. As far as linebacker, I don't want to pay too much attention to Deion Jones, the names you brought up, Zach Cunningham. What I did want to mention, when I was reading at Boston Sports Journal, you're right up on on what the Patriots need and some of the targets. You mentioned Anthony Jennings, and what stood out to me was you said, you've seen some things. I'm paraphrasing, but you've seen some things that make you feel pretty good about Jennings. What have you seen, and when did you start to really see it?
Well, he did start to come on in training camp, but and I think he got in there. Was it week 1 or week 2? He played a little bit, and I saw some things there. There was, quite honestly, there was one play in this last game against the Raiders where he avoided a cut. Or sorry, the Chiefs game. He avoided a cut by a running back, and he reminded me a lot of Hightower in terms of, like sort of when Hightower's been skinny, athletic Hightower.
Yeah.
He evaded the cut and then got after the quarterback and made a nice pressure. And it's just, he looked like an athletic linebacker who could make plays. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I want to see more of that.
We don't see a lot of that right now. Yeah.
No, I know. And this is almost a side discussion in terms of, Belichick and look, he knows way more not only about football, but about these players. He sees them every day in practice, but he just has, and this is coming from talking to people around the team, because, assessing what the team needs, you need to assess, all right, well, what do they think about the younger players?
Right.
Do they think they're going to get help? Because if not, then they need to go get something. And, Belichick, just for whatever reason, he has an aversion to rookies. Like unless pressed into it by injury, or the player's just so far and away better than what they have, then and sort of shows wisdom beyond their years, Belichick has a tough time trusting them. I mean, it's like, that's why Juwan Williams never got on the field last year. That's why Kyle Duggar really didn't cover Travis Kelce that much in the Chiefs game, because I think Belichick just didn't want to risk, a mental error from a rookie. And, it's a little bit frustrating because I do think some of these guys are capable of things. And Nick, we even talked about it before in terms of the whole Aqib Talib offseason story, where he said that Belichick offered him $6 million to cover tight ends.
Yep.
And now in hindsight, I'm like, well, thank goodness he turned that down, because he basically forced Belichick to play Juwan Williams, who makes $500,000, and he's doing a good job.
Yeah.
Like, he's done a nice job. So that's not only is that fiscally responsible, but that's also, it's good for the team that you're playing younger guys and you see what they're capable of. So, I mean, I want to see Jennings on the field more. I want to see Uche on the field more, which hopefully will happen when he comes back from injury. But he was
get healthy. Yeah, he's got to get healthy. I was excited to see him play.
But even before that, Nick, we talked about, I'm telling you, from day one of training camp, he was a starter, which you see that and you're like, all right, well, holy cow. Then all of a sudden we get out there week 1, and who's out there? Brandon Copeland. There was no injury for Uche. Belichick trusted a veteran who's played in the league for a while, even though Copeland is not that good at really anything. I mean, he's a fine player to have around, and he's a good sort of depth guy.
Right.
But, why not just throw Uche out there? And I think that goes to Belichick's sort of aversion to rookies.
All right, let's touch on one last thing here. You've got wide receiver, because everybody loves the sexy Greg.
Oh, God. Wide receiver.
The sexy conversation. And I said this on EEI last week. My guy, it's funny, I was reading your piece at BostonSportsJournal.com, and our number one, we match here. It's Golden Tate. Golden Tate's the guy to me that is somebody you can bring in. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's not just a slot guy. He plays mostly slot, but he's played on the outside. He was, at least, before he went to the Giants, which has pretty much been a disaster thanks to David Gettleman. But when you look at, his prior couple of years before getting to New York, he was a yak machine, which I think this team could use. And he's just, you mentioned about Belichick and veterans and rookies. He should be a dependable veteran. The only question I have about Golden Tate is the money. He's got a couple of years left. I think 1 year is, $8.5 million or $8 million. The other year is around $6 million. So he'd have to work, I think, with the Patriots regarding the money. But we know that they had interest in him the last time around before he signed with New York. We know New York is going absolutely nowhere. They stink. And if I'm Golden Tate, I'm about, 31, 32 years old, and I'm saying to myself, this might be my last shot. Let me go play with Cam. Let's see if we can rekindle something here in my own career and help this team out.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, he is now, I'm looking at, let's see, how old is he? I'm looking. He's 32.
Yeah.
He's 32. So, you don't exactly want to invest in those guys. At least you're not giving them a signing bonus or anything like that. I mean, he is on the books for his base salary is $8.5 next year. It's $6 million in 2022.
Yeah.
You're getting another couple years out of him, but he is, he's just a gamer. I mean, he is a prototypical sort of Patriots receiver in that he knows how to get open. He's tough as hell. He knows how to win. Like, I think you look at this receiving group in general for the Patriots. I mean, okay, so you have N'Keal Harry, you have Edelman, the state of Edelman right now, I don't think is good.
I think it's telling that you led off with Harry and had Edelman second. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I think it does. Now that you mention it, Damiere Byrd, maybe Gunnar Olszewski, and like Ryan Izzo, and maybe Jacoby Myers gets out there or whatever. But outside of Edelman, none of those guys know how to win. None of those guys have been in big games. In these games, we know that these games are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger for this team from here on out. And who knows? Some of these guys might surprise us and become, especially a guy like Gunnar Olszewski, I think has a lot of upside, and I think he is tough and has sort of that, dirt dog mentality. But the Patriots don't have a lot of those right now. And I think just in terms of attitude and experience, I think a guy like Golden, he's the first guy I'm calling about for sure. Golden Tate, and then we'll see what happens. Like, I don't want the flashy guy. I'm not interested in fantasy. AJ Green, who I think is a bum at this point and gets hurt all the time.
Yeah, I think he's toast.
Julio Jones, certainly in his prime, was tremendous, and the Patriots saw that up close in that Super Bowl. Some of the catches, Belichick even talked about it, I think, recently about, just that Julio Jones catch. That's an example of, you can't cover it any better. They just made a play.
Yeah.
And so he gives you that type of play that you won't get from anybody else. But I'm adverse to those guys. I want gamers. I want tough guys. I want guys who know how to play in weather, who are tough, not guys who come from domes and things like that. So yeah, I'm on Team Golden Tate too.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you're on the same team. As far as guys, of course, this goes the other way too, right? I mean, we talk about who the Patriots can bring in, but a guy that a lot of people have brought up about possibly shipping out is Joe Thuney. And Greg, before this season kicked off, you might look at this roster and say, I don't know. I don't know if you want to deal Thuney. I don't know if that's a good idea because it's a young offensive line, yada, yada. Well, now we look at it. We see what happened. The last time we see that team out there Monday Night Football against Kansas City last week, and you've got 3 of your starting linemen out, and it really didn't hurt them. So I think looking at this, if David Andrews can come back and be relatively healthy, I don't think it's crazy to think that Thuney could be gone when you look at Onwenu and Mason being able to hold down the guard positions.
Yep.
I think it makes it more likely. I don't know if he's going to be gone, but I do think when you look at where this line is now compared to where it was, or at least we thought it was 5-6 weeks ago, you feel much better about the idea of dealing Thuney.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, but look, Thuney's you're gonna have to get something of substance for Thuney.
Right.
Like I'm not letting him go for some fly by night guy. But look, you also have to factor in the Thuney contract situation into all this. I mean, because he's on the books for $14.5 million, so the trading team will get every week will be less. But then, basically you're lopping off half of that you don't have to worry about. So, about $7 million, $7.5 million that the Patriots can apply to next year. When I think cap money, every single dollar is going to be worth about 3 times what it is in a normal year because of the restrictions that we're going to have.
Right.
And also you have to realize, all right, well, I'm not going to tag Thuney, so he's likely going to walk. And so that means that you're going to get a third-round comp pick for him. Like, you should be able to do better than that right now.
Yeah.
Because you're going to need to keep the franchise tag open for Cam.
Yep.
In all likelihood. And so, all right, so would you rather have I'm calling the Falcons about Deion Jones, like a Jones for Tooney swap, because I do think I think part of their biggest problems, the Falcons, is they're shaky on the offensive line, and they've gotten old, and I don't think they're that good, and they can't protect Matt Ryan, who needs more and more protection every year. And, so I'm looking at that sort of deal, because I want something of substance for Tooney. Other than that, I might even think about a pick too. I might think about a first round pick. I think that's a bit of a reach, because the team knows that they're going to have to pay him a contract, so that always lessens the compensation. But
right,
you get a 2 for him now, and then maybe apply that in another deal. I would be willing to entertain it, because, like you said, I think Owenu is a guy who he's proven that to this point, 4 games into his career, that he is a starting caliber player, and hats off to the personnel department for identifying him.
Yeah, they nailed that one. I mean, people, they pick apart Belichick's drafts, and some of it I think is, worthwhile to talk about. I think some of the other stuff that people bring up is a little weak, but when you look at nailing a guy like Onwenu, if he can give you what he's been giving you, that opens up the idea. I mean, not only does Onwenu start for this team, and not only does he start and play well for this team, but if that all goes according to the plan, now that opens up the possibility that we're talking about now. You got another option to trade Tooney and bring back an asset, or somebody that can actually help you this season. You do have a couple of long shots on your piece at BSJ. You bring up Stephon Gilmore. You do say that's very doubtful, because he has a dead cap number of about $9 million. So you think that's unlikely. You bring up Julian Edelman. I would think that's unlikely because of his age, and other teams have to be seeing what's going on. And I would much rather add to wide receiver than subtract. My interest is at running back, because as part of your long shots, you have Sony Michel or Damian Harris. What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at the numbers. I mean, once Sony Michel comes back, they're not going to keep 5 running backs. I mean, so you have Michel, you have Harris as the 2 down backs. You have Rex Burkhead as sort of like the go-between, the flex guy.
The Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, he can do either job. Then you have James White as the pass back. Then you have J.J. Taylor. And so when Michel comes back, you can't keep 5 running backs on the roster. You just can't with the that they need tight ends, that they need a fullback. Like, it's just not going to work. So are you going to expose J.J. Taylor to the waiver wire? Or are you going to look to maybe either get something for him, or, I have a hard time, because running back's a collision position, much like, linebacker and safety, where, you're getting blasted every game. And I just think, the injury history for both of those guys is not good.
Yeah.
And the chances are one of them is going to get dinged up before the end of the year. And what are you going to do? Now you're going to go to Burkhead, a guy who is way over his workload. I think he's on pace for like 160 touches, and he's never made it through a season healthy with more than 91 touches in a season.
Wow.
And so you're asking a lot there.
That's an unbelievably low number.
I know. It reminds me of Edelman his first couple years in the league, where it was like, remember when he kept getting hurt every year?
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember doing the calculations. I'm like, every 45 touches he gets hurt. And then he finally got beyond that. Players do that. You see that a lot. They go through these injury issues very early in their career, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, they push through it, and it doesn't come into play anymore. And who knows? Maybe that's the case with Burkhead now. But I have a tough time. So I'm probably keeping Michel and Harris. James White is in a contract year, so maybe you talk to teams about maybe trading him if you like J.J. Taylor.
I don't want to see that.
Yeah, but with what he's gone through personally, I really don't think you can consider that at this point.
Yeah, not only that, though, he's just so dependable on the field.
Yeah.
He's just made so many plays for this team. I'm not there yet on J.J. Taylor. He looks nice in a small sample size, but I need James White out there on third down, especially in a big game. I feel more comfortable with that.
Yeah, and look, running backs are a dime a dozen, especially third down situational small backs. I mean,
Yep.
You should be able to pluck them from wherever. I mean, look at the Carolina Panthers with what they have going on with Mike Davis has made now you look at it and you're like, why did they even pay Christian McCaffrey? And that's an every down back. Yep. So, if I'm them, I'm either releasing JJ Taylor or I'm probably trying to find a home for him for like a 6th or 7th. He was undrafted. You're getting something for nothing. And looking for another guy like that next year.
All right, let's see. We did awards last week, but I think we can quickly run through some superlatives because you have some of those on your list as well. So let's run through a few of them. Let's start with the biggest flirt.
I went with N'Keal Harry just because I do think, look, and you've probably done this, every once in a while his Arizona State highlights pop up on Twitter or something like that, and you're like, where the hell is that guy?
Yeah.
That's why they drafted him. The guy who got the ball in his hand and would go through the whole defense, sideline to sideline and run through people and things like that. And we've seen in the preseason last year before he got hurt, these back shoulder, he's got, humongous catch radius type of thing. You're like, oh, this guy's going to be a beast. And so you've seen flashes of it. I have not seen any flashes of it, whether it's in training camp or now in the season. And I know Cam is in his ear trying to get him to play bigger. But to me, he's a humongous flirt because that player is there. They have to figure out how to unlock it. I mean, really, he's got to gird up and he's just got to do it. He plays too tentative. It's driving me crazy. It probably drives them crazy. And he needs to be. There's no reason why he can't be. The kid in Seattle.
DK Metcalf?
DK Metcalf, that type of player. Yes, Metcalf's a little faster, but there's no reason why he can't be one of those guys where it's like, all right, you just put it on him on third down. You got 3rd and 8. You have him running in cut. All right, even if the defender's bodying him, he's just going to push him out of the way and be a power forward type of guy. And he's just not that.
Yeah, I think with Harry, listen, I think we've seen baby steps. We've seen some progression. I think he is getting better. I think he is getting more confident. We've seen him at least break some tackles over the past couple of games, and we saw him make that play in Kansas City with the fade route, which, he's showing up. And listen, is it going to be overnight? No, but I like his progress. I feel more confident in Harry right now than I felt about him a month ago. I feel more confident about him right now than I've really felt throughout his entire Patriots career up to this point. So I'll take the progression when I can get it, and hopefully by the middle of the year, he's the guy that we see on a consistent basis making some big-time plays. Let's jump down to most athletic. You've got Jennings.
Yeah, probably just because of that play I saw the other day. It just sort of,
yeah,
it just sort of jumped out where I was like, I didn't, because I did, I watched some college film of him and I wasn't overly impressed, probably because of the position that he played, which was mostly sort of like a strong side, end of the line linebacker for Alabama, sort of a very utilitarian role in that defense and that scheme.
Yep.
And not much of a starring role. And I was like, well, they must not think a lot. They must just think he's a 2-gapper and, get off, hold up blocks and things like that. And so I didn't think much of him, but the more I see him play in space, the more I'm intrigued that he can run a little, he could jump a little bit, and he's strong as hell. I do know that. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen athletically out of him.
All right, jumping down a little bit further down the list, what really jumps out at me, honestly, is most forgettable. Sony Michel. Some people might say, Greg, Sony Michel most forgettable when he had that game against the Raiders. Tell me why he's most forgettable for you.
Because he just gets what's blocked. I mean, if they don't run well, it's because the line, didn't do their job, or there was problems with blocking and they couldn't hold up. If he does have a good game, it's because they opened up humongous holes for him. I mean, he's literally the definition of a plug and play guy that you could plug any other running back in there and they're going to get the same production. I mean, you watch when Damian Harris gets more time that, he's going to do what Sony Michel has done, and probably with a little bit more upside because he's a little bit more explosive and does have a second level where, you see some plays in Sony Michel, you're like, all right, he's going to get 6 yards, maybe 12 yards. But Damian Harris can turn it into 40 yards pretty quickly. And so for me, and I'm sure that'll irritate some Patriots fans that I call him forgettable, but I just looking through the roster, that's what jumped out, that he's forgettable in that he had that one great postseason. To me, it was all about the blocking and also the people and also the teams that they played. In terms of the Chargers didn't have any linebackers. The Chiefs were pretty soft.
Yeah.
The Rams, he really didn't do anything until the game was sort of in doubt. And that's when the line took over again. So you combine the line with the game situations and the opponents. I think that's why he had that postseason. And, when things are hard, they stay hard for Sonny Michel. He doesn't really overcome them. And that's no criticism of him. It's just who he is. And right. I just think that makes him forgettable.
Last one before we get to the BostonSportsJournal.com member question of the day. By the way, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, the Greg Bedard Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles. Rate and review us as well.
Yes, please.
One more guy I wanted to talk about was your most improved, Dietrich Wise. Man, he does look like a different football player. I think he's been much more disciplined this year, which is nice to see. He had a number of penalties last year that drove you crazy. Better against the run as well. Tell us about Wise, what you've seen from camp up till right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all saw it in the Tennessee playoff game, and it was going on all season before that, but it was, apparent to everybody that, they were having him play basically like, 5 technique inside, up against the tackle or 4-eye, and he was just getting blown off the ball, and he just couldn't hold up because he was, at the time, and really early on in his career with the Patriots, he was more of a 4-3 end. And that's really what he is. And last year, they really went to more of a 3-4, and they pushed him inside, and that just wasn't his game. And you were just – even before the season, I was like, they should trade him because he doesn't make any sense in the scheme. He didn't make any sense in the scheme all of last year. It helped cost them the playoff game against the Titans. And you figured – there wouldn't be all that much improvement this year, but you got to give credit to Dietrich. No one will ever accuse him of not being a hard worker. He's one of the hardest workers that I have ever seen in my career covering the NFL. He's always the last one off the field, to the point where it's annoying because when you're trying to do a feature story on him and you need to talk to him and you're waiting like an hour after practice, by yourself, but do your work, buddy.
What a journalist complaint that was.
Exactly. Everybody feel bad for the journalists.
Yeah, he works too hard. He lets me sit there for too long. Damn it.
Exactly.
Right, let's get to the BostonSportsJournal.com member question of the day. Of course, you can check them all out over at BSJ for 11 cents a day on their annual plan. Not only do you get top-notch analysis of the Boston Pro Sports, but if you're a Patriots junkie and you're listening to this, you are, then a membership at BSJ gives you access to a ton of video analysis from Greg. He does that all on the coach's film, and you get direct access to him in weekly chats. Matthew C. sends us a question this week, Greg. Was Bill saying in the offseason that he was confident with the 2 guys they had on the roster, talking about Brian Hoyer and Jarrett Stidham, just a ploy to drive Cam's price down?
It's a good question by Matthew, and before we get into it, one more thing I wanted to say about Wise is that he, give him credit. He got a lot stronger in the upper and lower body, and he holds up much better against the run, which he needed to do. So he's doing a great job, and he's still able to rush the passer a little bit. So he's done a good job. But as far as this Bill Cam question, this is sort of a Pandora's box, and what really annoys me or annoyed me during the season, and also in hindsight, once Newton got here, is that everybody says, and this includes certain sports talk radio hosts who I do a weekly segment with.
Oh.
They talked to, my good friends, Michael Felger and Tony Maserati at 98.5 The Sports Hub. Especially Felger loves to talk about like how the Patriots, meaning Bill, was putting out there that Stidham was the guy. This is who they're going with, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that's factually correct. Like, first of all, Belichick has never said anything publicly about how Stidham was going to be the guy.
Right.
And I saw a lot of what was written, and a lot of it wasn't really like sourced within the Patriots. A lot of it was just reporters, and we all do this. especially with the Patriots, because there's so much mystery with them, is that you look at certain things that they do and you're like, oh, well, they must think this.
Yeah.
So when they didn't get anybody in free agency, when they didn't draft a quarterback, when they could have gotten Jordan Love and just stayed where they are, once people saw that they did those things or didn't get a player at those times, that led some people who cover the team to say, well, the Patriots really like Stidham. He's the guy, all that sort of stuff. You read all the flowery coverage, but that doesn't mean it was necessarily true. I don't think it was true. I mean, I know I talked to people who would know, and they all had multiple people. They all had the same response, which was, well, yeah, we think he can be a good player, but we don't know. And, he's sort of where Jimmy was at the same point in time. He really needs more time, but, we could probably make it work. So I think it's a misnomer that Bill was going around saying that he was confident in Stidham. I don't think that's the case. I think that came from the journalists.
Let me push back on you for a minute, because people will say, well, some of these stories, especially on ESPN, would say the Patriots love him. The Patriots think highly of him. The Patriots this, the Patriots that. So when a reporter says the Patriots think this, you don't think that comes from Bill. You think that could be coming from somebody else. And if it is somebody else, who has that agenda to try to drive Stidham and his value up a little bit?
Well, I don't think it was an agenda. I think it's a couple things. I think you do have, and look, on ESPN, some reporters were saying that, and some very excellent reporters who have excellent sources within the team, like Mike Reese. Mike Reese, when the radio stations were playing some of the off-season Stidham stuff, like Reese was one of the prominent ones, and
yeah.
Mike's excellent, and he does have great sources within the team, and I believe he was hearing that from some people. But I also think it's the type of people who maybe were thinking, leading to those extra thoughts themselves. Like, okay, well, Bill's not doing anything, so my history with Bill tells me that this is the reason why. And it's because he really likes Stidham.
Gotcha.
And there was because what people need to understand is that when you cover the Patriots, there are a lot of people within an organization who have a lot of opinions on things. But really only the opinion of one person matters, and that's Belichick. And this goes with the draft, with free agency, with who they're going to play at certain positions. Coaches within the staff can have their opinions, and the personnel department certainly has had different rankings on different positions going into drafts. And then Belichick all of a sudden drafts somebody else, and it's because it's his decision, and that's what he wants to do. So I even listening to some of that chatter, I found it very surprising that people would think that Belichick felt a certain way, because really Bill doesn't talk to anybody. Bill doesn't tell anybody anything. Now, I'm telling you, Nick, you'd be surprised how many.
It's just funny. He doesn't talk to anybody.
No, I mean, there are people within that building who should know certain things, and they're like, I don't know, like Bill hasn't said anything, or Bill hasn't. That goes on all the time within that building. So in general, to bring it back to the question, I don't think that there was any grand ploy or anything like that. And I think really it wasn't about what Bill was saying verbally or getting out there and I don't think it had any effect on Newton's price being down. I think just his actions, that even people around the league were like, well, they must like Stidham because they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Where people were negating to look at, well, there are still veteran quarterbacks out there who don't have jobs, who the closer we get to training camp, the more their price is going to go down. So to me, Bill was just playing the market. He was shutting up and playing the market and letting any perceived actions speak for him, and sort of to get the team where he wanted them to get. And we've talked about this before. I 100% believe, from the people I've talked to, they would have signed anybody. Whoever that veteran quarterback who was left without a chair could have very, very well been Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston. They would have signed one of them, whoever that was, and then they would have been thrown into a competition.
See, that's why you listen to this podcast, because of nuggets like that. My man Greg with the inside word. Of course, subscribe, rate, review the Greg Bedard Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles. Till next time, he's Greg. I'm Nick. We'll talk to you. Hopefully, no craziness from the world of COVID will have taken over by then. But we'll get there. And whenever we get there, we'll find out. So he's Greg. I'm Nick. We'll talk to you next time.